Welcome to DIY DEI. Today, we will be talking about respect and inclusion in the workplace. Regardless of our personal beliefs and attitudes, DEI is the foundation and what I believe is essential to building a culture of respect. In the studio with me today, I have Lauren Birchlove, the Director of Strategy at NAMI Chicago. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. Excited to be here, Tawanna.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. Well, thank you so much for saying, hey, Tawanna, I want to be a part of this.
Yes.
And when you did, I was like, that is a great topic.
Yes. And thank you so much for your years of mentorship because I've known you for quite some time.
Well, January is,
what
is it, National Mentor Month?
Is that right? Oh my goodness. What a fantastic timing for us then.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your strategy, your story, because when we initially talked, it took a long time. We brainstormed about several topics.
Yeah.
And then, what was it? The other day, I was like, okay, I finally got it.
Yeah.
So I want to hear a little bit about your story and the challenges that you have come across in the workplace.
Sure. That's a great question. Let me think back here. So when I think about my journey, particularly as a queer person, as an LGBTQ person in the workplace, I'm going to kind of go back to the start of my career as somebody who was out as, I would say, like a lesbian person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I identified as a woman, and that was kind of how I was navigating the workplace in a relationship with somebody who is also a woman, and kind of the nuances that come with that when folks are talking about, their families and how my family looked a little bit different, right? And so that can come with some challenges, but I think now in the time that we're in, it's a little more normalized, right? To be in same gender relationships. And so while I would certainly come up with some awkward moments and feelings of marginalization, it wasn't quite as difficult to really gain the respect that I feel like now as somebody who identifies as non-binary and transitioned recently within the last couple of years can sometimes be a challenge, and particularly around how I'm referred to. I use they, them pronouns, and that can be a challenge for some folks. And I think there's an education gap in many ways. I think, particularly as I've advanced in my career to senior leadership, what I've also come to understand is that it can be a very lonely place to be. And I mean that as both a queer person in terms of my gender identity and sexual orientation. I often find myself as the only in many, meetings, webinar situations. I found what we often call a chosen family in the LGBTQ community. I mean that in the workplace as well. You find your people, right? But it definitely feels isolating, But I've managed to really cultivate, again, a sense of community among, my LGBTQ peers. The Association of Fundraising Professionals, I have to make a plug, has an LGBTQ affinity group, and that's a wonderful community.
Shout out to AFP.
Yes, shout out to AFP. They're a wonderful group to be a part of. So, we've come up against challenges along the way, but it's definitely, you find ways to work around it.
Yeah. So, what were the challenges that came up in your specific workplace, or in a previous workplace?
Yeah. I mean, again, I mentioned the education gaps. So as a queer person, you're often the one who has to do the education while experiencing the marginalization at the same time.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. So and that's never fun, right? Because it's, in the instance of pronouns, for example, that's how folks are acknowledging your personhood and how you identify. So it can seem kind of superfluous, but when every day you identify as somebody who does not align with, she, her pronouns, or as a woman, right, and you're really trying to establish that as somebody who's transitioning. What the support really looks like is being affirmed in your gender neutrality. For me, that was what I really needed from my peers, my colleagues. And so the way that I needed that from them was to acknowledge my pronouns. And I present, I feel, androgynously, so my gender expression has always been very aligned with how I see myself.
It's not always that simple.
Right.
Someone could present themselves as a woman.
Yeah, for sure.
But they identify completely different. So I think the pronouns are that much more important.
Right.
But we don't always know asks who asks.
Yes. Yes.
So do you, well, I because I'm always asking you.
Yeah, of course.
Do you, I guess it goes with that education.
Yeah.
Are you ever annoyed when someone asks?
No, I would much prefer folks ask than not. And you know what I found is folks of all I'm constantly surprised, and I think this taps into my own bias, right? At who is proficient at asking and comfortable asking. I have found folks of all generations have asked, which says to me that this is not something that is a new generational thing or a young people only thing. That's what I mean by the education gap. We have folks who at very different stages of their lives are exposed to gender expansive people, whether it be, you know, from their previous employment opportunities, or maybe somebody in their family identifies as trans or non-binary. So I've always been really appreciative when anybody has asked, particularly if it's, you know, the first time we're getting to know each other, or ahead of an opportunity where we're having to speak in front of other people, so they can ensure that they're referring to me the way I want to be referred to and treating me the way I want to be treated. You know, in some cases, folks don't want to be outed as trans or non-binary in the workplace. You may know that they are trans or non-binary because you have a close relationship with them, but for, you know, whether it be safety, whether it be just privacy reasons, they don't want to share that information to folks that they don't know very well. So that's also something important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we create those physical and psychological safe spaces.
For sure.
And as not only as leaders or managers, but as colleagues, that we are, you know, teammates. We are creating that safe space for our colleagues to show up as their authentic selves in whatever way they want to. Do you, as a leader at NAMI Chicago, are you hosting any trainings? Are you educating on a organization level?
You know, I was so impressed when I came to NAMI that, and this actually touches on something that I neglected to say a moment ago, which I'm going to touch on now, that I'm again very impressed with at NAMI. And I'm about 6 weeks in. I'm loving it, but I'm still new to the organization. Thank you. Yes, I am really loving it. I think normalizing sharing pronouns is huge for everyone across the board. When it is just you as a trans or non-binary person, we go back to that feeling of isolation and being the only, right? So if you're cisgender, which means that your gender identity aligns with the sex you were assigned at birth, sharing your pronouns just normalizes that whole experience. It makes it so that this is something that everybody does here. It is a cultural norm as an organization. So, you know, one of the things that NAMI did that just alleviated so much anxiety for me as I was onboarding was they sent out a kind of getting to know you checklist that asked, what are your pronouns? And they also sent out an introductory email when we were onboarding and checked in. Would you like us to include your pronouns in this introductory email? All of our email signatures have pronouns. So it's just baked into the organizational culture that this is something that everybody is part of, whether you identify as cis, trans, you know, gender fluid, agender, it's normalized. So it creates this environment of just neutrality around it. That's how I felt walking in the door. There was so much the kind of coming out process that takes so much mental energy. Every time you meet a new person, you have to go through the kind of like mental exercise of, how is this going to impact our working relationship? What are they going to think about me? Are they going to think that this is like a thing now? You know, that can be so just laborious and take away from your job. So just normalize. I mean, truly, it's like how much work.
We talked about that.
Yes. So having these normalized behaviors just makes it just absolutely easier.
It allows, like I said, it allows us to walk in as our authentic selves, focusing on the work, reducing the stress and conflict.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And when you approach your colleagues with a lived experience as a Black woman, you know, with whether or not I have encountered racism in the workplace or, you know, bullying or harassment, when you show up and you approach your relationships with a lived experience, we can be more compassionate.
Yeah.
And we can, lead with that sense of humanity. And we can focus on the work.
Sure.
We can and be more successful because we are removing that laborious feeling,
Sure.
that just having to do the extra work of explaining and educating.
Yeah.
But it also allows us to really hear each other as it pertains to the workplace. We are valuing each other's opinions. We are allowing each other to have a voice.
Yeah.
And we are coming together to work towards a common goal and to, have a successful outcome at work.
Yeah. Yeah. As a leader, I think being non-binary in the workplace has really taught me to not make assumptions. Folks come
point.
to work with different backgrounds,
Right.
different experiences, and when it comes to gender, you can't make assumptions.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about earlier, folks can present all over the spectrum and identify in different ways on that spectrum. And I think the same is true for ideas.
Yeah.
Somebody can have 3 master's degrees and you just never know where they're coming from,
Exactly.
or they can be somebody who does not have a million credentials and they have the lived experience to give such rich background to whatever project you're working on. There's just going into the workplace with openness and curiosity, I think makes such a powerful leader, and opportunities for collaboration.
Yeah.
You're stronger in your collaboration when you can be curious about new ideas, different ways of doing things, new processes, maybe throwing processes out the door altogether,
Exactly.
just sort of deconstructing the way that you might approach something and
Right.
giving some freedom
Right.
to, the other folks in the room to take things in a different direction. And just open it up to new possibilities.
Yeah.
Is a
Yeah.
powerful way to be a leader, I think.
And that is a powerful statement.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to a young professional on presenting authentically in today's workplace? And should they be doing any research, or is there something they need to be walking into the door saying, this is what I need from you to be productive, successful, and authentic?
Tune in this Friday at 7 p.m. as I discuss the journey of an adoptee.
In my records, it talks about the social worker's observations of me and my mother, and there was a disconnect.
Multiple questions. in
Yes,
one.
yeah, no, but good questions. And I think it's unique to every individual in the sense that, we all have different needs in terms of safety and how we feel psychologically safe, how we feel physically safe. It goes back to what I was talking about with
Right.
some folks don't want to be out in the
Right.
workforce. What advice would I give to a young person? I would say, consider what makes you feel safe. What makes you feel safe, what makes you feel passionate, and where the balance is with that. Find your people. Find mentors. Find people who can be supportive of you and your authentic self and help guide you kind of in that direction and where that fits. And do identify what you need. One of the things when I was moving on to eventually finding my role at NAMI Chicago, but when I was in job interviews, and this was frankly terrifying to ask, but one of the questions was, what are you doing around gender diversity education, gender inclusion, education, all of the LGBTQI kind of competency across the board? That competency is kind of a weird term, but you know what I mean? Scary because you just never know how people are going to react. You never know if it's going to kind of get around in the community that you're
Right.
asking these questions, and what does that mean for kind of the reputation? Like, oh, this new
Right.
hire is going to be asking some strange kind of questions. How do we answer it? I was so impressed that so many organizations were very honest and transparent. So I just want to applaud just the general nonprofit sector here in Chicago. And organizations are in wildly different places, to be honest, you know,
that is
which
very
is,
true.
you know, some are have a, you know, long laundry list of things that they aspire to be doing.
Right.
Others are very far along in what they are doing. And so,
And some are just focusing on specific components of DEI
Yep, absolutely.
and have not caught up to this specific topic just yet.
Sure, absolutely. And so what I am happy to see, though, is that there are organizations out there that are doing the work. And I think the one that I'm at is one of them, which is one of the reasons I'm there. But it definitely was one of the top factors that I was looking at when I was in my job search, and that was very intentional for me.
That's definitely something that is of top of mind with me when I'm job hunting is, you know, how will I as a Black woman be accepted?
Right.
Because I'm often the only one in the room.
Sure.
And how safe will I feel to voice my opinions because I will probably 95% of the time have a completely different background than most of my counterparts. And how will I be accepted?
Yeah.
And will it be a good fit for me? Not for the organization, because I'm an asset, but
That's right. Yes, right. Like, who's the fit here? Yes.
who's the fit here?
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, that's definitely something that as a Black woman I have to think about. Am I going to be safe in this environment? Safe to share, safe to be successful, safe to fail. And make mistakes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Safe to fail. Safe to speak up.
Yes.
Safe
to ask for help.
Safe to ask for help. Safe to feel uncomfortable. You know, to say this was offensive to me.
Right.
This felt disrespectful, and to feel like that's not going to be something that you will be retaliated against
Right.
for. To speak up in a way where, you know, I find often calling folks in is so important. Some organizations are just not receptive to that. You know,
Yeah.
they don't have any interest in investing in any sort of process.
They don't
where,
want to have the uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly.
And they encourage that. Well, maybe encourage is not the right word, but they don't encourage that safe space, the creating the culture of respect. And I'm happy to say at the organization that I am at is there is that culture of respect. There is that we will create that culture of inclusion and diversity, not just to be saying it. We're going to walk the walk. We're not just going to talk the talk.
Yeah, well, we love to hear that, right? I think, too, I just want to touch on the word safe space, because I think when we talk about calling people in and having those uncomfortable conversations, that really feels more brave to me than safe. Because
Yes.
folks don't necessarily, it feels uncomfortable. It can feel uncomfortable. And that can,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of courage and bravery that comes in
Right.
for folks who are putting themselves in a position of vulnerability to say, that feels disrespectful for me,
Yeah.
or that feels, you know, even as like a microaggression
Right,
for me. It's also brave, I think, of organizations to say, we're going to create those spaces and
Right.
we're going to facilitate those conversations, recognizing that as an organization, we have room to grow and might not have this 100% right, but we're going to try.
And remember those the people who are being called in.
Right.
Don't be offended.
Yeah.
Because I mean, come on. Sometimes we don't know, or
Right.
we don't realize that we're doing it. And I am saying we, because I oftentimes have to be mindful to ask, you know, what are your pronouns?
Right.
I'm not saying how do you identify, but I want to be respectful and respect how you are identifying and how you want to be addressed or acknowledged.
I think that's where organizations can really step in and hold space for the discomfort that comes with, I mean, stepping on folks, causing harm is uncomfortable,
Right.
whether you mean it or you don't.
Right.
It's sort of like the intent versus impact thing, right? The impacting somebody in a negative way hurts, feels awkward, even if your intent was, you know, not to cause
Right,
harm.
right.
And so I think that's where organizations really have the role of carrying that emotional labor for them and dealing with the discomfort rather than expecting the folks who experience the harm to kind of assuage the guilt, right? They
Yeah.
talk about that with like white guilt too.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We talked a lot about that.
Yes. So I think the same, you know, it's not the same dynamic, but it can be similar, right?
Right.
Where if you maybe refer to somebody by the incorrect pronouns, or you say something that's kind of offensive in regard to gender expression, or, you know, maybe say something offensive about somebody's domestic partnership situation, you know, rather than expecting the person who you've offended to kind of take on the emotional labor of comforting you because you feel awkward. I think that's where the organization can kind of step in and create a space for folks to process that discomfort. I think we saw that a lot in, you know, groups creating kind of like white-led reading groups, you know, things like that for folks to kind of just process their experiences.
Yeah, it's
know?
not to make you feel bad, but it's to educate. And sometimes I don't want to say sometimes. I think it's okay to educate our counterparts on certain issues, because if we do not do that, how will they know?
Yeah.
And in my lived experience in the past few years, I heard a lot from the Black community. It's not my job to educate.
Sure.
Well, whose job is it? If we are not educating our counterparts, whose job is it? Because let's be honest, the information that's on the web is not always correct or accurate or up to date. So I think it's just as important for us to educate each other, other groups on certain issues. How else will they get the correct information?
Yeah, there is so much information floating around out there. And I just want to underscore, I think the thing about gender identity, just LGBTQ identities in general, is that it's intersectional. So intersectional, we have opportunities, I think, to kind of talk about the racial justice issues that come to play for folks of all gender identities and sexual orientations. So we do have those conversations about racial justice. I think when we talk about gender identity and when we talk about sexual orientation, we have to have those conversations. You know, it has to be interwoven.
I want to say, because you said identities.
Yeah, right.
That, you know, it's been changing over the years. I think it's a little bit more fluid as safe spaces are created, as people are they're becoming more comfortable in their own skin to say, I'm fluid, I'm pansexual, I'm bisexual, I'm whatever it is. People are becoming more comfortable with saying how they feel, regardless if we agree with it or not. But we have to create those safe spaces for people to be comfortable, and we have to normalize that. We won't always agree with it.
Yeah.
There are religious beliefs, there are, you know, personal beliefs, ethnic, you know, and different cultural beliefs that we don't always agree with. But at the end of the day, it is all about respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can respect
Right.
whatever, but let's get to this work. I will respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not new, right? These things are not new. The difference now is that we really have a much more rich vocabulary to describe, I think, these identities, and it's much more common language.
Right.
You know, gender diversity has existed since the beginning of time. We've had cultures that have been around for many, many years that have celebrated third, fourth, fifth gender identities. So we're just seeing it permeate, I think, more prominent spaces. And we're having conversations about it that are becoming much more public. You know, we have people who are actors, singers, performers, politicians now who are gender expansive. And so it is just at the forefront in the spotlight. So to your point, we're at the forefront of it. So we need to learn how to build that respect and just accountability to treating each other with shared humanity, because it hasn't gone anywhere.
Right.
It's not going anywhere. And it's just something we need to continue to cultivate a culture of inclusion around.
So we've been talking about respect in the workplace, but I want to touch a little bit about your health and wellness. So when you leave the workplace, when you are home with your significant other,
Sure.
how do you just decompress?
Yeah. I have an amazing therapist. I really do. I see her once a week. She's fabulous. I think therapy can be an amazing tool. And one of the things that I've worked on with my therapist is really exploring gender identity and what it means to be a gender diverse leader. So therapy's great. I'm also a drummer, so music has played an important part of my life. Most of my life, music is therapy. I think the beautiful thing about drums is that it's a full body experience. So I'm fully immersed in the sound, and it's a judgment-free zone. I love it. I have cats, and I love animals. I think animals are a wonderful way to decompress. It's all, just surrounding myself with also people who I love, and that chosen family piece, as well as, my partner who's just incredible, and also works in a social justice oriented. She's with the city, and so I think having somebody who is also committed to furthering social justice in our city and in our just in this human services sector is
and don't
really
forget
awesome.
gardening. Last time
gardening.
We talked, you were gardening.
So actually, I can't say that I'm a gardener. I get to benefit from the gardening. My partner is really the gardener. Yeah. So
well, I can't wait to catch one of your harvests one day.
Yes. Well, I mean, you were doing quite the gardening yourself. I mean, you had like a serious operation going on.
I've been a little busy, so I have not been able to set up my garden. Hopefully this summer. I truly want to do that. You know, the hornworms got me the last time.
You were talking about neem oil. I think it was like you were like selling me on the gospel of neem
oil.
I'm
all over it. Neem oil, the little I think some people do a little cayenne pepper, different things. But thank you for joining me today.
It's been a pleasure.
And until then, join us next time on DIY DEI.